In this lesson, I want to talk about a few of the functions of the timeline and how we add layers to it and some of the different layer types that we have in After Effects. Okay, so as we talked a little bit earlier, this is the timeline, and it's a little bit difficult to talk about any of the functions of the timeline without having anything on it. So let's go ahead and add our first layer. I want to show you how to add layers to the timeline that are generated right here in After Effects instead of these right away that we've imported. So let's go ahead and do that now. And then next we'll add one of the imported ones. So one of the first layer types that we can add is going to be up here under the layer inside of the menu. Go to Layer, New, and I'm going to add a solid. So go ahead and click Solid, and you can choose what color you want your solid to be by changing that here. We'll just go ahead and go with this gray for now. So click OK, and that's going to just add that solid right there in the composition view window. And the size of it was 1280 by 720, so you can see that fully filled up the composition size, and it also dropped it down here on our timeline. So now I want to import, or actually add one of those layers that we imported earlier. So let's go ahead and use the swatches.psd that we imported. So to do this, I can either drag this onto the composition window or onto my timeline. Either way, it's going to be added in both places. The only difference is that if I drag it onto this composition view window, it's going to drop anywhere that I drag this. But if I drag it onto the timeline, I just undid that with Control Z, it's going to drop it right in the middle. So that's something to keep in mind just based on where you want that layer to be. So now we can see kind of some of the different colors that we're going to be working with for this project. And I think I would actually like to change this solid color to maybe this lighter color, and we can end up using this solid maybe as our background later on. So to change the color of a solid, once you've already set it up, all you have to do is select that solid, come up here to Layer, go to Solid Settings, and instead of going into the color picker itself, I'm just going to use this little eyedropper tool. And you can see that as I hover over different colors, it gives me a little bit of a preview of what that's going to look like. So we'll just go ahead and color pick this kind of off-white color and say OK. And we see that that updated the change in our composition viewer. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about something interesting you can do with the timeline. We see that I have these two layers here in my timeline, but what if I don't want to look at one because let's say I'm really just using this swatches file as a reference, but it's not something I actually want to have as part of my video. Well, I can come over here to this first switch that you see, which is this little eyeball, and if I click that, it's going to turn that off so I can no longer see it in my composition viewer, but it doesn't take it away from the timeline. So if later I want to reference those swatches for something else that I need to choose the color of, I can simply turn that back on and it's back, and I don't have to drag it back on from the project panel, which once we get more files over here, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to navigate around and find the files that you need. So let's talk about adding another type of layer to our timeline. So we'll come back up here, go to Layer. You want to make sure that you have the timeline selected that you want that layer to be in. So we want to have that main composition area there highlighted. So come up here to Layer, New, and come down to Light. And I'm just going to go with my default light settings for now. So just go ahead and say OK. And then we'll say OK to that as well. Now, just getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, the reason why this light doesn't make any kind of a difference is because of that little dialog box that popped up. And what that is saying is that a light is basically a 3D object, and it needs 3D depth to be able to change its environment. So right now we only have 2D layers, just the regular layers that we had already dragged in. So if I want that light to affect my solid, I'm going to have to come over here and switch on this 3D switch. So I'm going to go ahead and click that now. And you can see that now the light is affecting that solid pretty drastically. So this is going to be something we talk about more later on in the course, these 3D layers. But just know that if you're using lights, you're going to need to get comfortable with using 3D layers as well. So something I want to do here is kind of create sort of a vignette with this light. So right now, if I just kind of deselect, we notice that this light isn't really pointing directly in the center of our solid. It's kind of off to the side and pointing down a little bit. So that's why our light is sort of more diffused here in the lower left-hand corner. So I have a little bit of a method that I've created for getting this light to be perfectly right in the center. So the way that I do this is by using one of After Effects' built-in measurement tools, and that's the Title Action Safe. And you can find that right down here at the bottom of your composition viewer, and it's going to be this little button right there. So that's going to be Choose Grid and Guide Options. And Title Action Safe is just this little choice here right at the top. So if I click that, you notice that we get these kind of little hashes here around the side, and then we get this perfectly centered set of crosshairs right there in the middle. So this is a great thing to use if you want to know what the exact center of your composition is, no matter what size your composition is. That's always going to be in the center. So I like to use this all the time, switch it on and off, just so that I can see where that center is when I'm trying to align things. So let's go ahead and line up our light. Now, because our light is always going to be a 3D layer, it doesn't even have that 3D switch. But something unique about 3D layers is that they have these different kinds of handles, which make it a little bit easier to move them around. So if I grab this X handle and click and drag that, we see how this moves the light, and really this is only moving it from side to side. Even if I move up and down, it only moves it from the side-to-side motion that I just kind of accidentally do as I'm dragging that up and down. So what I want to do is basically line the middle of this light up perfectly with those crosshairs. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that X handle until I get that lined up with that top crosshair. And then the Y handle is going to bring it down. So we'll do that opposite there. So now those crosshairs are perfectly lined up with the handles. Now, something else I want to look at is this little area here, and with a light, this is called the point of interest. So even if that light is originating from this middle point, I can change the point of interest, which is basically just pointing the light in a different direction. So I'm going to line this up right in the center as well, just so that is perfectly centered with everything else. And then the last thing that I can do is play with this Z handle, and that's this blue one right in the middle. Now by clicking and dragging that, that moves the light closer and further away from that solid based on really just what direction I'm dragging it. So let's see, I want this to be a little bit diffused on the edges. So right around there, right where the edges of the light itself kind of just start to overlap a tiny bit on the sides with my composition size. So this is going to give me kind of this vignette look. It's going to give me this kind of soft diffused light, but it's going to be a little more intense in the middle. So I really like doing a look like this for a background that I would create. So this is what we'll be using later on as the background for the rest of our scene. And if it's getting on your nerves, you can always turn off the Title Action Safe by going back to that button and then just clicking that again, and that will get rid of